your voice has a wobble to it. I know there's a story here, and I know that you don't like talking about it. And I think I know that that's not because it's personally troubling to you, but your concern is that it will be misinterpreted if you talk about where this may have come from. But I think actually it probably makes sense just to clear the air. So what is the wobble in your voice?
Well, I really don't know where it comes from. I know that I got it. I had a very, very strong voice until 1996. When I was 42 years old, my voice got this tremor in it. And the disease is called spasmodic dystonia. And I had no inkling. For many, many years, doctors have said to me, did you have some trauma at the time? That because apparently the onset of this disease, which affects, I don't know how many people, but there's a significant number, maybe 50 or 60,000 people who are affected in this country. But the onset of the disease is often accompanied by trauma. 2 years ago, I was reading, I was preparing a racketeering lawsuit against a bunch of vaccine companies, against 4 vaccine companies that make all 72 of the mandatory childhood vaccines that are given to children in this country. And for the first time, I had to go through the manufacturer's insert of every one of those vaccines. When I got to the flu vaccine, I realized for the first time there's 420 side effects listed as vaccine side effects on those inserts. And I had never read them all the way through. When I was doing the flu vaccine section, I saw that many of the flu vaccines listed spasmodic dystonia as one of the side effects, the known side effects. And they have to get FDA approval to put that side effect on their manufacturer's insert. And FDA under federal law has to agree that there's a probability based upon the evidence that that injury is caused by the vaccine. So this was only 2 years ago, and I've been working on vaccine issues since 2005, and people would ask me, do you have any vaccine injuries in your family or among people who are close to you? And I would say no. For the first time, I recognized that there's a possibility at my injury. The reason it's a possibility is because at that point in my life, I was teaching at Pace University Law School in White Plains, New York. And right next to my clinic where I taught, there was the school infirmary. And the infirmary every year would post a sign saying, come get your flu shot. And every year I went in and got my flu shot. Oh, in 1996, I got a flu shot. And I have no idea whether that flu shot caused this condition, but it is now at least a hypothesis.
And it's possible that you don't remember the dates well enough, but if you do, the onset of the condition was following the flu shot that year and not too far or something along those lines?
Exactly.
All right. Well, that's fascinating. So it's only in the last couple of years that you've even potentially connected the dots between your voice condition and vaccines. Now, I must say, I'm also beginning to wonder about something that has affected my life. And that is, as my viewers know, I have a severe wheat allergy, right? The tiniest amount of wheat in something sets off a cascade of symptoms. And basically, until I discovered that I was allergic to wheat, I had, I think, basically continual inflammation. Having gotten wheat out of my diet, the inflammation has cleared up. Lots of things I didn't know were symptoms of anything went away and improved the quality of my life dramatically. And when I accidentally get wheat because somebody hasn't been clear on where there is wheat, the symptoms come rushing back. So I know I have this condition. It's mysterious to me and has been for a long time because my ancestors have been eating wheat for thousands of years. And I had thought I had a model in my mind of there being exposure of things in the gut to elements of the immune system that are not actually supposed to contact the contents of the gut, which regard the food contents as foreign, and they fight, right? Basically develop an allergy because a part of your immune system is seeing molecules that it shouldn't. And what I did not understand at the time, I must say, I don't know, and I will ask you shortly how you regard yourself, if there is such a thing as an anti-vaxxer, and if there are such people, if you are one. But I am certainly, I would say, almost the opposite. I am a huge fan of vaccination. I have lectured on the beauty and elegance of this mechanism. And to this day, I believe it is the most powerful tool in our medical toolkit. However, what I did not realize was that the thing I had been lecturing on, that is to say, the borrowing of the immune system, the sending information into the system of B and T cells so that they are alerted in advance of pathogens that one's ancestors have never seen, that mechanism is only part of what goes into a modern vaccine. And there are other elements, for example, these adjuvants, which effectively they irritate the immune system so that it reacts more strongly so that the vaccine is more effective. And, in principle, sure, that's a great idea. On the other hand, aggravating one's immune system may have arbitrary consequences. And nobody ever told me that, you're getting this vaccine, you should be especially careful about contacting certain kinds of molecules, about other things you might do, because if you, in the period, and frankly, I don't know how long the immune system is in this excited state after one is vaccinated, but these adjuvants have the potential to intervene in arbitrary ways and cause you not only to have a strong reaction to the antigens in a traditional vaccine, but they can also cause you to react to other things that are present in your body. So I had not put that together. That means I am now wondering if I might be suffering from a vaccine adverse event, and I will likely never know.
Well, it's interesting because, first of all, there's a lot of potential culprits. And as you know, I was on the trial team in the Monsanto case, and Monsanto has this herbicide, which is glyphosate based. And one of the things we know about glyphosate is that it interferes with the shikimate pathway, which is the pathway that your microbiome uses to regulate immune responses. And in 2006, Monsanto told farmers to start spraying glyphosate onto wheat at harvest time as a desiccant to dry out the crop to avoid mold. And actually the largest sales of glyphosate, I think about 70% of the sales have occurred since then. And for the first time, they were spraying it on food because most of the use of glyphosate is early in the growing season when you're trying to fight weeds before allow the corn to grow up above them. It also had never been sprayed on wheat before because they have Roundup Ready corn, but they don't have Roundup Ready wheat, or at least they didn't. And huge amounts of glyphosate were sprayed on the corn, on the wheat, and people in our country and around the world began having celiac diseases and gluten allergies at a rate beginning in 2006 that we had never seen before. So we're all swimming around in a toxic soup right now, and you can't really pinpoint one culprit and identify that in an outcome like you have. I will say this on the vaccine adjuvants. Here's what happened. The original vaccines were live virus vaccines. Polio vaccine and smallpox vaccine. What happened is that they realized that if you give somebody a live virus vaccine, it can mutate in your body and your gut, and you can create a more virulent form of the vaccine. What you're doing is you're giving people a disarmed version of the virus, so a less virulent form of the virus, which will give you immunity against all forms, including the much more virulent and deadly forms. But the virus, when they use a live virus vaccine, can morph in your body, and it can turn pathogenic and virulent and transmissible. And for example, today, 70% of the polio in the world is vaccine strain. So it's coming from vaccinated individuals. This is what WHO acknowledges. So very early on in vaccinology, the regulatory agencies expressed preference for dead virus vaccines. So you disable the virus, you give a fraction of it, or you kill it and then give it to people. The problem is the dead virus vaccines do not provoke a durable and robust immune response that you need to get a license. And what vaccinologists discovered very early on was that if you add something horrendously toxic to the vaccine, that the body, it kind of shocks the body, and the body then remembers the antigen and associates it with that toxic element. And so there was a search around the world by vaccinologists for the most toxic elements in the universe. And they began adding mercury, which is 1,000 times more neurotoxic than lead. And it is the most toxic element in the universe that we know about that is not radioactive.
Right. I was going to say plutonium is going to beat it. But,
So, but mercury was discontinued, got a really bad name, was discontinued in most of the American vaccines in 2003, with the exception of the flu vaccine. And it was replaced by aluminum. And you saw, but there was aluminum throughout. What we've seen in this country, the vaccine schedule exploded in 1989. We went from the 3 vaccines that I got as a kid to the 72 vaccine doses. It's 72 doses of 16 vaccines that my children's generation got. And it happened very quickly, beginning around 1989, and you started seeing these explosions of neurodevelopmental disorders, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD. Autism went from 1 in 10,000 in my generation and your generation to 1 in 22 boys in our children's generation. Food allergies like peanut allergies, also eczema, anaphylaxis, asthma, allergic disease. And then a third category of diseases also became epidemic, the autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and juvenile diabetes. And most people think that the allergic disease we began seeing was a result of the aluminum adjuvant, because the aluminum is put in the vaccine to prompt essentially an allergic response, a heightened antibody response. And it turns out that it's not just, there are things like peanut oil excipients in the vaccine itself, so you may get an allergic response to that, but also things that are in the ambient environment at that time appear to also get targeted by that response, as you just pointed out. So if you have a Timothy weed outbreak the week that you get that vaccine, you may have now a lifetime allergy to Timothy weed. And there's 2 scientists, one called Callings and another called Anthony Mawson, who have done studies that show that children who are vaccinated have 30 times the rate of allergic rhinitis as children who are not unvaccinated. Now, I had 11 brothers and sisters. I have something like 70 first cousins on both sides. And I didn't know anybody with a food allergy growing up. And yet my children, almost all of my 6 children, have allergies. And so we know that something happened. And when Congress told EPA, what year did, for example, the autism epidemic begin? EPA scientists came back and said it was 1989. And that's the year that the vaccine schedule exploded. It doesn't mean it's all coming from vaccines, because there's other things that happen on that timeline, like PFOAs, which are flame retardants, which became ubiquitous. Glyphosate around that time became ubiquitous. Cell phone radiation, ultrasound, neonicotinoid pesticides, and a number of others. So you can't pinpoint one toxin. But vaccines make a very good culprit because of those adjuvants. The adjuvants are designed to give you allergies, and allergies suddenly beginning in 1989. It's hard to find somebody prior to 1989 who has a peanut allergy.
Right.
People who it's pretty easy, like in every classroom, you'll find people. We went from having 6% of Americans having chronic diseases in 1940. In 1986, we had 11.8%. And by 2006, 54%. And the big change happened in 1989.
Well, so this actually treads into the area that Heather in my book is focused on, what we call hypernovelty. And I think people need to start thinking about the puzzles, about what's wrong with them in a different way, right? It may be, you can have an argument about a particular cause and whether it leads to autism, for example, right? And lots of people can shut down that argument and they can say, well, this doesn't cause autism. We've established that. But the question is, well, then what does? There's something in the environment. If there's an increase in the rate of this disorder, it is implausible that it would be a change in the underlying genes. So it's something that we are allowing to interface with children.
So genes, as you know, genes don't cause epidemics. Genes, right. They may provide the vulnerability, and there are subgroups that are more vulnerable, but you need an environmental toxin. That's just pure science.
Right.
So there's a very, very famous scientist, I think he's at Mount Sinai, called Phil Landrigan, and I've actually, used him as an expert in some of our cases. He's one of the leading kind of toxicologists in the world. And he has looked at this problem that you're talking about and said, why did all these things happen essentially beginning, in the early 1990s? Why was this huge explosion of chronic disease?
Yeah.
And he came down with 11 suspects. Things that you have to find something that became ubiquitous in that period. So it has to be something that affected equally Cubans in Key Biscayne, Miami, and Inuit in Homer, Alaska.
Right.
And there's only a certain number of interventions that occurred during that period that you can blame. But it's an easy scientific problem to solve. If you were government officials interested in solving it.
If you were inclined to solve it.
And unfortunately, the people who are responsible for all of those toxic exposures are also the most powerful lobbying groups in the United States economy and in Washington.
Right. So I don't even know what the description of this problem is, but in some sense, you have the fox inherits the role of guarding the chicken coop. I don't know.
I'd say the fox is guarding the fox coop.
Right. Yeah.